The Kansas City Chiefs, like many before them, were not able to complete the three Super Bowl championships in a row. What's next for the Chiefs? What do they have to do to get back again? And is the dynasty over? How does their dynasty rank against past NFL dynasties? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers. If you're coming through on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. Let us know you stopped by because we already know you're subscribed. If you're new to the program, please hit that subscribe button. Helps us out tremendously. You don't want to miss an episode as we break down the NFL draft. We got Williamson's Mock Draft 1.0 coming out here in the next couple of episodes as well, and all the news and everything going on in the offseason in the NFL. We hang out and talk about it all, break it all down daily here on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. Let's talk Kansas City Chiefs. They are the final team to be eliminated from the tournament. And it was clear watching the Super Bowl, I think, what they might need to do this offseason to get a little bit better. I think we're going to answer the question that I've seen put out there a lot. Is the Chiefs dynasty over? Did the Philadelphia Eagles kill the Chiefs dynasty? We can rank them with some other past dynasties because I think if they would have won their third in a row, that's something you have that no other team in NFL history has. They don't have that anymore, as amazing as their run has been. So where are they at ranking versus, the Steel Curtain, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 49ers dynasties of the past, the New England Patriots dynasties of the past, other potential dynasties? What is a dynasty even? So I think that'll be a fun conversation later, but let's hone in on this team, this Kansas City Chiefs team. Is it enough to watch the Chiefs in the Super Bowl and just say, just fix the offensive line and go back to it?
Sort of. I mean, obviously, they have Mahomes, they have Reid, they have Spags. No one's crying for the Chiefs. That's for certain. A lot of people are quite happy with that result. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Tired of them just dominating everybody and, being ridiculously good in the postseason and all these types of things. Now, I don't want to go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Matt. We can answer that question, I think, real quick. They didn't go 2-12. They lost in the Super Bowl.
Right. Badly.
The dynasty is over. You got Reid, you got Mahomes, you got Spags, you got Chris Jones. The dynasty is not over.
No, I mean, they're going to be a contender for as long as they want, basically. I think that much is true.
Yeah.
So I think what I was about to say is I think it's easy to overreact to last taste in our mouth, bad loss. They look pretty rough. And frankly, I think they're vulnerable. Maybe the second most vulnerable that I can remember them when their season ended. Now, the first most is the year they traded Tyreek Hill, and it looked like they were taking a big step back to rebuild and do things differently, and then they won the Super Bowl that year. So, Again, we're not crying too much, but let's start with the go ahead.
And that's kind of one of the big things with the Kansas City Chiefs is they looked like they weren't their best version all year long, but they kept winning. And that's kind of what we talked about. Where it's like, well, the Eagles have a better roster top to bottom, but the Chiefs don't lose. And they have this and they have this, and they can bank on it. And the rest hasn't really mattered. And finally, in the Super Bowl on the biggest stage, you saw all of their warts come right to the forefront. And the Eagles were like the one team in the NFL this year that were able to take advantage of that and kind of remind them that they aren't that good of a football team. Top to bottom, that they might have some work to do. And it's something that we saw from them in their 17 straight wins in one score games, and they have this magic ability to win. Does it really matter? It still matters, the rest of the talent that is on your roster. And the Eagles were the team that were finally able to expose that.
Yep. And frankly, I underrated the Eagles and just how talented and how good of football players they have, and the Chiefs might just be closer to a top 5 type of team, and the Eagles are way better than everybody else. That might be what we take away from this season. Now, I mentioned their vulnerability. Their defense is really, really solid, but Justin Reid's a free agent. Bolton's a free agent. Who's the other one I was looking at here? Wharton. He's a contributor on the inside. Now, those guys are replaceable, and they're not the end of the world, but Reid and Bolton are pretty important. I would bet Kelce retires, and I hate to say it this way, but it might actually help them just to open up cap space and use that money elsewhere if he's only going to be a part-time player or a shell of himself. But still, I mean, that's not a replaceable piece. The Kelce Mahomes connection, especially on third down, red zone, except, stuff like that. And looking at their pass catchers too, Marquise Brown's up, DeAndre Hopkins is up, but it's the line. I bet they lose Trey Smith at right guard. Tooney's going to go back from left tackle to left guard. So your left guard center situation's great. They're paying for this Juwan Taylor contract. I think it's one of the worst contracts in the league. I think he's a bad right tackle, and they're paying a lot of money for him. Suamataia is probably still a ways away at left tackle. So it's conceivable in a perfect world, they need to find 3 offensive linemen. And we know you're not going to get a starting left tackle with the 31st pick in the draft either, so it's going to be a challenge. I mean, I do think they're vulnerable, but again, no one's crying for the Chiefs.
It's not very different than how we talked about the team last year. What were the 2 big needs? And they traded up to attack those needs. They got themselves a wide receiver. They wanted to be more dynamic on offense at wide receiver, and they needed a left tackle. And they traded up to get what they thought was the last actual left tackle from a tools perspective in the draft, because it's hard to find those guys early. They didn't see one in the end of the first round. They went up and got Suamataia, who has the height, weight, speed, arm length to be a starting NFL tackle, 20 years old, really raw. And you saw him play, and you're like, yeah, he is really raw. Was not ready to be that guy as a first year player. And that's probably that's probably the first thing for me with the Chiefs. And Suamataia was on the bench at the end of the year, but Worthy had the best game on offense in the Super Bowl. He had 2 touchdowns, and you saw that bomb at the end of the game and getting open deep. And you're like, okay, there's that 4.2 speed, right?
Yeah.
What does Xavier Worthy look like in year 2? Can they start to build the offense around his speed? Can you figure out a way to throw in a Cooper Kupp to be your power slot and be the Travis Kelce replacement?
Let's not forget, BP. I mean, Rashee Rice was awesome before he got hurt too. I mean, Rashee Rice was tearing the league up, and I thought he was desperately missed in the Super Bowl as a guy that could get open now. If you can't protect and you're going to get it out of Pat's hands, they didn't have that guy that could hit you on a quick slant, and I thought Rice was desperately missed. So I know he has off the field stuff and suspension might be looming, but Worthy and Rice aren't a bad place to start for pass catchers.
No, and you throw one more guy in there that can probably work in more of a slot type of a role, whether it's a veteran player, Cooper Kupp, whoever. Maybe it's a tight end in the draft. One thing you can get at pick 31 is possibly a tight end. Is a pretty good tight end draft too. Whether it's round 1, late round 2, they could probably find another player there. They drafted a guy recently as well to compete there with Travis Kelce. You're not going to find Travis Kelce probably, but you could probably find a guy that could compete. And so you can do some work there. The big question though would be Suamataia. Does he have a big second year? Did he learn a lot this year? And or just technique wise, is he so far away? Is he going to be one of those players that just never figures it out and he ends up playing guard or something for you? But maybe you get a starting guard there instead, and you're still trying to find a tackle. So that's a big one. Is Suamataia? What is he in year 2? Does he look a lot less raw? Is he ready to be a starting player, even if it's not at left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs? Because they attacked the same needs that we're probably talking about right now last offseason. And usually rookies, you can't bank on them. Year 2, year 3, they're going to be a lot better. So that's a huge key for the Kansas City Chiefs. There's last year's draft class.
Yeah, and one thing now that we're all down that aisle, I think one thing they're paying for, and I'm not criticizing the Suamataia pick. He was a 63rd pick in the draft, and they knew he was raw and didn't want to play him this year. And maybe he's worth it a year from now. But they've drafted pretty poorly of late on offense. And besides Rashee Rice, I mean, these are some of their high picks on offense. I'm not even going to count the rookies, but Wanya Morris was the 92nd pick in the draft. Doesn't look great. Sky Moore was the 54th pick in the draft. I mean, that was a flat out miss.
How does the Sky Moore not hit? Because he's had the talent, and you have Patrick Mahomes, your quarterback. Those are the ones that is like, man, how is he not a little bit more valuable? The big one I'm sure you're about to bring up is Clyde Edwards-Helaire
and Mecole Hardman. Yeah. I mean, again, how's Mecole Hardman not hit? I mean, in that situation, just go be fast. And I don't love the running backs either. I mean, not that that's the biggest problem, but a lot of the skill guys they've drafted and tackles are not paying off. And that's not a great trend.
We'll talk a little bit more about the Kansas City Chiefs. The short answer is Dynasty is not over. They definitely need to retool, and they definitely need to hit on some cost-controlled players in the draft and continue to develop the guys they have drafted recently and continue to replace, which they've done a really good job of on the defensive side of the ball, some of the players that might be leaving via free agency as well, and figure out how they got money to re-sign some of the guys they have and not let everybody walk out the door every time they're up for free agency. Let's talk about where their dynasty is, how it ranks, what a dynasty even is, and how it ranks against past NFL dynasties. And could they end up being number one in the end? Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, your work does not end when the clock hits 5. You know this, and you wear so many hats as a small business owner, and your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do, and that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in, and there's so many ways they help you get the correct hires and make better hires, and LinkedIn's has new features to help you streamline the whole process. They can help you write job descriptions, then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates on LinkedIn. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. And by the way, go to the place that has the biggest network, that has the most potential job seekers, even those that might not even know they're looking for the job, and they see your job, which is the perfect job for them. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So here, I look at the meat. I do think there is a process problem with the Kansas City Chiefs on offense. I think on defense, they're doing such a good job. They identify good players, tough players, smart players, hard-nosed players. They plug them in, they develop them, and they just keep churning out like rock-solid guys. So I'm not worried about Nick Bolton moving on.
Right. They develop defensive backs and linebackers.
So good, especially with defensive backs, right? And you can. This is a really deep defensive line class, by the way, and every shape and size. You can get at 31. They can get a starting defensive front seven player in this draft, right? If that's what the direction they want to go. But
no one knew who L'Jarius Sneed was when they drafted him, and he ended up being like the best corner in the draft for that.
Yeah, safety, and they're like, "Well, you look more like a corner for us, so we're gonna make you a corner." And all of a sudden, he's a shutdown guy out of nowhere.
Right? He's like the highest paid guy in the league,
But on offense, they got to figure some things out. And you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Andy Reid. That's a cheat code. They should be better at developing the talent, even if they kind of miss on the guys. But one thing they have to stop doing is drafting linear, just fast players. Like Hollywood Brown, I didn't like. Hollywood Brown was not it. Mecole Hardman was not it. Marquez Valdez-Scantling was fine because he wasn't expensive and
they got him for
on the outside and let him run some routes, but he wasn't that good either. You got a Xavier Worthy now. You got some speed. Stop it. You need to draft slow guys. Just throw the 40
Michael Thomas type guy.
Draft savvy, slow, smart, tough football players on offense and stop looking at the 40 times. That they've done so many good things the Chiefs have, but the wide receiver thing, the playmaker thing on offense, they just keep getting it wrong.
Well, the reason, as you know, and everyone knows, is they are no longer an explosive passing attack since Tyreek Hill, but I think they're going about it wrong. That doesn't mean you just draft speed. They can't get off the line of scrimmage and get pushed around.
Can't run routes.
Yeah. I mean, they do need to expand the passing game more vertically. Like we saw Mahomes throw the greatest deep ball he can still throw the deep ball. The problem is not his deep ball prowess, but his
throw in the Super Bowl was in the fourth quarter.
It was unbelievable, right?
Air yards to his rookie wide receiver. I mean, that was a dime. That was a way better throw than the one that Jalen Hurts threw to Devontae Smith, which was actually a little bit behind him and hung up. And the Chiefs DB was almost able to get his hand in there, by the way. So you've still got that. And so I understand why you want some speed to kind of stretch some things out. But after the catch, and Rashee Rice is really good at that. But yeah, stop with the linear fast guys. Chiefs.
The linear,
there's other
track guys.
There's other ways to win the ball down the field. Get a tall guy with good ball skills, for example. I mean,
Tyreek's greatest strength might not be his pure speed. I mean, it's his acceleration and body control. You know, I mean,
After
mixed
the
with
catch,
that.
and
Right.
a lot of things to it. Right. But they'll be back, and they're a flip. I look at the
they're
they'll
contender.
There's a chance that they're better next year than they were this year, top to bottom roster.
I mean, they had to win in the margins to an extreme level, like 17 games in a row, 1-score games. And that is going to come home to roost to some point. That's a hard way to live. They're better at it than anybody in history, but it's still a hard way to live.
An interesting point by you about Travis Kelce. Okay, maybe he retires and now money comes off the books. Patrick Mahomes' contract is like kind of a sweetheart deal at this point. Like there's other teams with worse quarterbacks that they're going to have a tougher time building around their quarterback than the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes right now. So you almost can't use that as an excuse with how the cap is going up. So they might be able to keep the Justin Reids of the world and keep some of their own free agents that maybe in past years they haven't been able to. But you got to start to look at Chris Jones as well and give him some help on your defensive front and keep and stay strong there. But you got to figure out the offense.
Hopefully he doesn't get old on you. You know, I mean, he doesn't show any signs, but you know.
Suamati is a big one. If you can get a starter out of the guy you drafted last year, then that's a big one, whether it's at left tackle, right tackle, guard. And, you know, they've already spent so many resources on the offensive line and to potentially need still 3 out of your 5 is kind of a rough situation for the Chiefs to be in. But they got to be a little bit smarter about the offensive side of the ball as they build. But they're going to be fine, and they're going to be good again next year, and potentially even better.
Potentially even better. But I know we're going to talk about like their legacy and things. Like, let's say they never go to another AFC Championship game. I mean, then the dynasty kind of ends here. If they never go to another Super Bowl, you know, I mean,
or let's just say they don't win any more Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Right. And they're on a path that was the best path.
The best.
And losing a Super Bowl is kind of a weird thing where, you know, and I always use this, and it's kind of the last thing I have left when I'm talking about the 49ers. And I say it kind of tongue in cheek. The 49ers are still the greatest. Joe Montana is still the greatest because they never lost in the you know, in their dynasty run in the Super Bowl. Joe Montana was 4-0 in Super Bowls and never threw an interception. And so
as was Bradshaw.
Because exactly. Looking at what Patrick Mahomes is doing and what Brady did and the Patriots did, you start running out of ways to argue for, you know, for your guys back in the day that you grew up watching, right? But the Steel Curtain, can you remind the folks what the Steelers of the 70s did? Because it was an unbelievable run.
It is unbelievable. I have two notes I wanted to throw in the Chiefs' legacy here too, though. I mean, one good, one bad. And again, we're comparing unbelievable dynasties and the best teams we've ever seen, which is a joy. But it blows me away that the worst year of Mahomes as a starter is losing the AFC Championship game. I mean, that's been their floor during this run. That's a garbage year. We were a Final Four team, and our defensive end lined up in the neutral zone, so we don't get to go to the Super Bowl that year. That's a terrible, awful year. That's your floor over that. I mean, like, even the Steelers 4 and 6 years, there was a year Bradshaw was hurt, both their running backs were hurt. They didn't go to the championship game. They lost in the first round of the Raiders or whatever. You know, like, it's hard to make that your floor every year is a Final Four team. That's your worst. Now, the other thing, though, that I don't think is great, and it's also cuts on the tip of our tongue, both their losses in the Super Bowl were bad losses. Like, they weren't even competitive. You know, like, that's not a good look. I mean, I can't imagine your Niners or my Steelers or Jimmy Johnson's Cowboys or Bart Starr's Packers or a Brady team not being competitive in a Super Bowl.
And even when they're down early, they're not out of it, right? And you saw the Steelers.
Falcons, Brady. I mean, Brady comes back and torches the Falcons.
28-3, right? And that game didn't stay 28-3. They didn't lose by multiple scores in that game. And even when you consider the years you didn't win a Super Bowl, so the 49ers were the one of the closest teams to having a three-peat in 1990. And Roger Craig fumbled in the third season after they'd won back-to-back. Roger Craig fumbled against the New York Giants in the NFC Championship game, which might have been the difference in the game. And do we think the 49ers would have lost to the Buffalo Bills that year? So you could argue that the 49ers were closer to a Super Bowl than the Chiefs were when they got blown out in this Super Bowl. Even the Niners didn't make it to the Super Bowl in their three-peat attempt. And so that's another thing that's difficult when you're starting to measure dynasties. Like, how good were the bad years? How good were not even bad years, but how good were the non-Super Bowl years? Would the 1990 49ers team be better than the 2024 Kansas City Chiefs team if they played each other? So then you start talking about, okay, what about this roster versus this roster? And I think team players are better now and faster now. But at the same time, there was no free agency to break up the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I wanted to bring that up.
You get a Hall of Famer until he retires, and the Chiefs, we're talking about how they have to churn through talent, which is, I think, a big factor, which makes it much more difficult in today's game to keep that going long-term. But I think it's also less difficult if you have the superstar quarterback and a great head coach, because you have an advantage for so long that maybe you didn't quite have that clinical advantage in the 70s and 80s that you might have.
100%. I definitely think that's true. That's kind of the new, if you have the quarterback coach, it's more valuable now than then. Like Bradshaw's not as good as Brady and Mahomes. If that would have been Stabler, they would have been probably just as good, or, several others, But real quick on the Steelers, like, they won Super Bowl 9, they won Super Bowl 10. Everyone associated with the team that from back then, or my dad that used to watch them, or my uncle, will tell you the team after that Super Bowl, when they were going for the three-peat, was their best ever. But Turkey Jones picked up Bradshaw and dropped him on his head and like broke his spine or something, and then
that up? I've
never. No, it's the Browns thing. Go look at the Turkey Jones Bradshaw highlight. You talk about illegal now. He got kicked out of the league.
I know that's before I was born, but I've never heard of Turkey Jones.
I only know it because of that one play. Like, it ruined the Steelers' chance at a three-peat. So I just whipped it up now. I mean, like, their last 9 games, they shut the opponents out 5 times, and 2 of them they only allowed 3 points or less, and they still didn't win the Super Bowl that year because they had no running game or no offense. Like, that was their best team, was their three-peat team, and their defense was sick. But you're right, though. Like, I make this joke all the time. Like, I'm the first-round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1977, 30th overall or whatever, after they win the Super Bowl one of those years. You're definitely not a starter as a first-round pick. You might not be the number 1 backup. You make the team, but you're a first-round pick. You better make the team. Times are so different. Like, the third-round pick might not even make the team. And to your point about, like, not having to deal with free agency, and this is we never talk about the Packers enough as a dynasty either, because it's so old and half of it's not even the Super Bowl era. But I mean, if the Super Bowl started 5 years earlier, they might be the best dynasty ever. They
would have had the only three-peat as well.
You're right, exactly. Yeah. So they did it. They're like, hey guys, you just started the Super Bowl 2 years too late or whatever.
Yeah, nope, sorry, NFL championship doesn't count.
Yep. And I know the Niners had a draft like this, but in 1974, the Steelers' first 3 picks were Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth. And then in the 5th round, they picked up Mike Webster, all of whom go to the Hall of Fame easily. And then in free agency that year, they picked up Donnie Shell, who eventually ended up going to the Hall of Fame. All their contracts would have been up the same year. We take it Swan, Stallworth, right. I mean, not to mention Green and Ham and everybody else, it'd be impossible to keep the team, half of the team.
That's why it's so hard to rank them, even though we are going to try here next. And then there was the non-capped, like, salary wars of the 90s of teams bringing out missionaries trying to battle each other, the Cowboys and the Niners and the Packers.
Like Charles Haley and Dion going back and forth, and which is pretty cool.
Era. So do we have to change? Do you have to only count what was the best dynasty of each era as well? So let's get into that.
And the Patriots basically had 2 dynasties. We're not giving them enough airtime today either. Their dynasties, unbelievable.
We're going to bring them up quite a bit next. This episode of Peacock Williamson brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. They're America's #1 sports book for a reason. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can get in on that fourth quarter comeback. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. And by the way, NFL fans, I know it's NBA season right now. Major League Baseball season is about to get going. But you can still bet on the NFL draft. NFL draft props are my favorite way, actually, to bet on the NFL all season long. And you can bet on next year's Super Bowl champion already at FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today or download the app. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what is a dynasty? Like, do you have to break up the Patriots into two separate dynasties? Because I don't think you should do that. But I also look at the 49ers and think, there was the Montana Walsh. And then there was like the one-off in the 90s. It was kind of the same idea, but it was a different head coach and it was a different quarterback. So I don't really count.
See, I look at that one as the same. As an outsider, I mean, what people don't forget, I mean, people don't remember, Jerry Rice wasn't there for the early ones.
Yeah, so Jerry wasn't there in 81,
right,
but he was still there, and he was kind of the only guy that was still there in 94. Yeah. But then they added like Dion for 1 year, and there was that, Jerry Jones against DeBartolo, and they were spending money, and they both ended up with mercenary versions of Deion Sanders, and one with Deion Sanders. And there was like Ken Norton played for both of those teams, and those teams were just fighting it out. And it was, the Packers were in on that in the 90s as well. Do you count the Packers and the Denver Broncos that won multiple in the 90s?
Even the Joe Gibbs with four different coaches. I mean, Gibbs with Washington. I mean, they didn't have the same quarterback ever, but
New York Giants of the late 80s and into 90. The New York Giants, the team that did beat the 49ers and ended their three-peat run in the playoffs in 1992. So, like, what even is a dynasty? I think we got to figure that out, because however you slice it is probably how you find your answer. If you say 10 years, it's got to be the same coach, quarterback or whatever, or the same coach, or it's got to be some continuity, or it's got to be only the Super Bowl wins, or like, because what the Chiefs are doing, like, is that a down year? You lost in the Super Bowl. It seems crazy to be like, the Chiefs are trash now because they only got to the Super Bowl and didn't win.
That's like their average year. If it's losing in that's the average. Coincidentally, their run is most like the Steelers in that it's a 6-year stretch. It's not a Patriot 20-year stretch or whatever. To me, the ones I don't think you can argue are starting in chronological order. The Packers to start the league, the Steelers clearly, your Niners, but times were changing then, and there was more turnover. Like those first two I mentioned are the exact same players, just over a short amount. It's Starr, it's Bradshaw, it's Lombardi, it's Knoll. There's not much change. But then your team starts to come around, and there is change, and there's a major quarterback change, even though Montana was still good. I mean, it just happened to have this great Steve Young move. Then I think the next one is the Jimmy Johnson Cowboys, which I know that's a little shorter lived, but they were as good as anybody. And the last one wasn't Jimmy Johnson, but I feel like if they wouldn't have blown it up, they could have gone more. But they were a comet that didn't last as long as the others. But
and if people are too young to remember and don't remember what the 90s were, the NFC Championship game was
the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like there was one year the Steelers lost. They were like 15-point favorites over the Chargers, and the Chargers beat them here at home. It's the worst loss in Steeler history. And everyone's so upset about it with Cowher. And I'm like, yeah, but they would have had to play Steve Young they would have lost by 20 in the Super Bowl. I mean, that was the Steve Young running over
O'Donnell's Chargers.
This was already decided in the NFC.
What was the final of that game? Like 50-10 or something crazy. I don't even
right. I mean,
Jerry Rice had 5
The Super Bowl was played last week in the NFC. I mean, this is over.
Yeah.
And then I think, obviously, the Patriots are a dynasty, and maybe the most impressive at all because of the longevity. But they went 10 years without a Super Bowl. 10 years. People forget that. I mean, there's only 2 constants in that whole thing, really, is Brady and Belichick.
Yeah, those were completely 2 different teams. But when I think of the Patriots, I count the entire Belichick-Brady era. And they're number one for me. They have the most titles.
I think they're number one, too.
And I count the whole thing. And it's kind of like the Hall of Fame debate. You can slice it up any way you want. To me, it's a feel thing. And the Patriots are number one. They got the most titles. And they were good.
And they had to withstand the free agency stuff. They didn't have Swan and Stallworth up the same year, And, okay, we're going to reinvent ourselves with Gronk and Hernandez or Welker and Moss. hey, frankly, we're going to play defense for the first 10 years with Vrabel and McGinnis and those dudes. Like any way you want to cut it, we're going to adapt to the league,
Yeah, so pretty amazing. So Patriots are 1 for me. And then I think it's Niners, Steelers next. And the question becomes, I think clearly the top 4 is now the Chiefs. Where are the Chiefs and how many more do they win? Like if they won, are they 2? Are they 1? If they would have won the Super Bowl?
I feel like if they would have won, we'd be talking about, are they the best dynasty ever? Because it's such recency bias too,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody remembers our 2 teams we're talking about as well as they should. Nobody, we're not even mentioning the Packers,
I mean, I don't even remember the first 2 of the 49ers Super Bowls. Like that's the first thing I remember was, oh, cool. The team my family roots for is the 49ers in 1988 and 1989. How awesome is this? I get to grow up watching the team that is going to be my favorite team win Super Bowls. And then in 89, the San Francisco Giants were in the World Series as well. I was like, dude, this is awesome. My favorite team that I'm kind of born into, but they're fun to watch, right? Oh, they get to win championships and be in the Super Bowl all the time. And then you realize, oh, it's not always like that.
That's hilarious you said that, because the first football game I remember watching like every play and knowing like what a cornerback was Steelers Rams Super Bowl, their last one.
Yeah.
I was like 7. But I knew that the Steelers were big. But I'm like, oh, okay, and they get to play in the Super Bowl. Same thing as you. I was a little late to the party.
The Dynasty has been my entire life, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shoot, okay, it's gonna be a little
the end of it. Yeah. Yeah. But I think the Chiefs. I mean, if they win another, I think they're in. If they would have won this one, the talk would have been, is this the best dynasty ever?
Yeah,
unfair or not. I mean, we might be getting ahead of ourselves, but
and then if you win a couple more, because then you start counting like total trophies. So if you count the 94 Niners, they got 5. The Steelers got 4. Is that enough? The Patriots had Brady's got 7, but the Belichick has 6, right? With the Patriots, and then Belichick's got his New York Giants ones as well. But those 4 stand out, and you can argue whether or not the Cowboys or whatever else. And I'm kind of not counting the old Packers, because I'm looking at Super Bowl era, but the Packers would be top 5 as well. As far as NFL championship, Packers, Steelers, 70s, 80s, Niners. Then you got the Patriots for 20 years almost, and now the Chiefs. Those are the top 5 dynasties. And if the Chiefs get a couple more, they might be number 1. Number 1 right now for me is the Patriots, and I think you can argue semantics about the Steelers and Niners.
And I know we're going to wrap it up, but our buddy Mike Sando did a 2-part series on The Athletic before the Super Bowl and then kind of after. And he kind of had some random criteria, to be honest, but he thought the Steelers were the number 1 dynasty by his criteria. And if the Chiefs would have won, they basically would have unseated them. Now, I half agree with that,
because they would have hit the same criteria.
Right. I mean, here's 4 and 6 is the big thing,
Yeah. So this is the Sando criteria: winning 3+ Super Bowls over 5+ seasons, posting the NFL's best regular season winning percentage, beginning with the first Super Bowl winning season and ending with the final or most recent one, reaching the conference championship round more than half the time during the dynasty. So this is definitely more of a peak sort of a list versus a long-term list. So definitely like the 49ers and the Patriots fall behind the Steelers and the Chiefs, if that's your criteria. So again, it becomes kind of like the Hall of Fame vote. How do you slice it? What's your criteria is what's going to spit out your answer for who the best dynasty is.
Yeah. I mean, he even did things like he just did a chart of the 6 years of the Steelers, 6 years of the Chiefs, where the Chiefs had a little bit better winning percentage. They won 78% of their games. The Steelers won 76. But the Steelers' point per game margin, which is pretty crazy, their average game in the 6 years was a 10-point win, where the Chiefs' average game in the 6 years was a 6.3-point win. It's small things, but it's, sometimes you got to put numbers into it. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Over 6 years, your average game is a 10-point win.
And the championship appearances, it's 5 versus 6 because the Chiefs made it every time in the 6 years.
Yep.
Was that Turkey Jones year?
Turkey Jones year. Go YouTube Turkey Jones taking Bradshaw and just totally dumping him on his head.
Honestly, Turkey Jones is kind of one of the biggest figures in NFL history that nobody talks about, man.
It's big. It could have been the first 3-peat ever. Didn't have a quarterback or any running backs. Turkey Jones.
Oh, man, that's fantastic. All right, let us know what you think. The greatest dynasty, and what do the Chiefs need to do?
Nicknames have fallen off a long
Man,
time. Come on.
Dude, don't get me started.
I know, it's one of your pet peeves.
A-Rod?
That's
Not only is that a lazy, terrible nickname, there was already an A-Rod in another sport.
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing? We're nicknaming Wink Martindale after another guy whose his nickname was Wink Martindale. Can you come up with your own stuff, please? People,
I love LaDainian Tomlinson, but you're not the first LT.
There was come on.
You know,
I mean, that is the worst thing that our generation is doing right now is bad nicknames. We got to get stronger at that.
BP,
you don't get a nickname unless it's a good, unique nickname. Everyone doesn't have to have a nickname just because your name is long. Like Teteroa McMillan. T-Mac? No. Absolutely
that's the
not.
worst.
I will never call him T-Mac. He's too good of a player. He deserves his own unique nickname.
And then when they try, they come up with Danny Dimes. I mean, where's Billy White Shoes Johnson? Come on. Flipper Anderson. You know what I mean? Come on, man. I mean, there's so many great ones. Sweetness.
I mean, come on.
It just epitomizes that player.
So good. At some point at the turn of the millennium, we just got lazy as a society.
Really lazy. Yeah.
We got to do something about this. All right. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Matt Williamson's Mock Draft 1.0 coming at you next time right here. Peacock and Williamson.